Hello, and welcome to another episode of Education in Focus with me, Leigh, and our education experts, Jason and Lisa.
Hi Lee, good to see you again.
Hi, guys.
Hiya. So, today we will be discussing peer relationships. And I guess the first question that I have really is why do our children seem to have difficulties with their peers?
Okay, so just before we go any further, I just want to really start off by saying that, nothing that we're going to say today should really give the impression that you or your child should tolerate bullying in any of its forms. So if your child is
Mm,
being bullied, and we will talk a little bit about how we identify bullying in this episode, but, if you do think that your child is being bullied, then you do need to contact the school immediately and insist that it be appropriately addressed. Most schools do have policies. Well, not most, all schools have policies to address this. So that is something that needs following up.
yeah.
But I just wanted to get that out there straight away because I don't want, to be anyone to confuse or think that we're kind of condoning bullying. All right. So just going back to your question, Leigh, why our children might struggle with their peer relationships in general. Gosh, I think it's a massive area. And I think it is something that's worth digging into a little bit because if we can identify why our children struggle with their relationships, then that helps to identify what strategies they think that we think might be useful to them. So obviously, let's start off with a biggie. It might be attachment related issues. So perhaps they're avoidant, either consciously or subconsciously, in of forming relationships with others. Maybe they pull people in and push people away and pull people in and push people away, a little bit more ambivalent style. It might be because due to fears of feeling quite invisible or being forgotten, they become very overwhelming for their new friends. Maybe they shower them with love and affection. It can get a little bit too much for other children. We might find that our children can be quite controlling because they like to control their environments to make things predictable so that they're not upset and they're not hurt by things that are unpredictable to them. But we can also consider other things. So they might struggle to understand certain social cues. This might be reading other people's body languages or greetings, answering questions in an appropriate way, making conversation, using the right amount of physical contact or physical force or physical space. Um, or then we may have to consider that they have developmental delays, maybe socially or emotionally. So we might find that they appear a little bit younger than their peers. So maybe they gravitate naturally towards younger children that are more in line with their developmental and emotional age. Or we might find that they seek out adults more because adults are perhaps more tolerant of their comparative immaturity, or perhaps the adults are the ones that are more capable of giving them the nurture that they're seeking if they're feeling a little bit younger than their peers. Or also, if we consider developmental delay issues, we might find that they show, compared to their peers, like a relative lack of empathy, a lack of remorse, or a lack of cause and effect thinking. But then many of our children also struggle with emotional regulation. So we might find in their relationships with their peers that they are very quick to anger at perceived slights or rejections, and they find it hard to regulate themselves to be able to kind of get into that conflict resolution mind space that they need to kind of repair relationships with friends. Or they might struggle with being impulsive and find that their impulsivity gets the better of them in social situations. And of course, our children are more likely to spiral into shame as well, which can be incredibly difficult to regulate, um, but isn't very helpful when you're trying to make connections and meaningful connections with those around you. So, I mean, it's quite a broad area of why our children might struggle, but those are the things that immediately kind of come into my mind. Is there anything that you think I might have missed, Jason, there?
No,
Anything?
I think that was a really comprehensive outline of the issues. Actually, I was thinking, wow, you've covered it all. I think. Actually, interestingly enough, as I was listening to it, I was actually picturing particular children I was thinking of that fit some of those descriptions. I'm sure people listening to this may well be thinking, yeah, that's a lot of my child there. Obviously, no child is exactly one thing or another, are they? But there are elements of those factors that affect our children. So yeah, the heart of it really is often these unmet needs, and that's
Yeah.
I think from my point of view, I think whenever you're considering this issue because it's huge, it is because it becomes so complicated and becomes quite emotional, and individual situations can become very difficult at times. We've got to keep coming back to the heart of it, or the root of it, which is what are the unmet needs, where, because that's the thing we need to continually try to support the child with. There's a great quote I always think of when I don't know if anyone knows Sarah Dillon's quite a well known therapist
Yeah.
in this area. She's helps her write those books about the 8 of therapeutic parenting and things. Well, I've seen quite a few sessions with her, and she's always amazing. And she always says, "An unmet need remains unmet until it's met," which is
Yeah.
so basic but so true. And you just need to have. Sometimes I think these clear, sort of well spelt out things are really important to have in your head, just to remind you when everything gets in a bit of a flurry. It's like, what on earth's going on? Try and dig underneath it all.
Just something you said there about that kind of thinking back to some of Sarah Dillon's work along with Sarah Naish is the fact that
Mm,
actually our children might not have learnt how to play. So
yeah.
many of our social skills are developed in those really, really early years, and then we build on them as we get older, when they kind of mature as we mature. But if those fundamental building blocks aren't there, then, you know, there's nothing to build on, or the building is a bit shaky. So
Yes.
actually, if our children haven't had the opportunity to learn how to play, if they've not been shown how to play at a very, very early age, then concepts such as sharing or turn taking might just not sit easily with them. Perhaps they don't know how to win, they don't know how to lose, they don't know how to cooperate, they don't know how to
Mm,
compromise. All of those things are learnt in very, very early play, which if they've skipped that step, you know, it can be really difficult for them to have it seated within them. So it might be a simple fact of not learning how to play with others.
yeah, absolutely. And that's where you can begin to work with other professionals and the school if you need to, and say, well, that is the need. That's where my child has an unmet need, and they need to start learning those things. So even if whatever their chronological age is, they might need to do that sort of regression, if you like. Um, so I was thinking, from a primary point of view, if you have had your children since they were very young, they can still have huge developmental needs and gaps. But if they happen to have been with you so that you can go through the early years of the schooling and nursery, things like that, then I think that's really to your advantage, because that's where they can still do a lot of the catch up, they can still do a lot of exploratory play and develop those early in social interactions and those sort of skills. And so at home, they might be happy to do things that are even more toddler-like than they perhaps do in school, because even at 4, they still start to become aware that perhaps they're not doing the same things their friends are. But um, I think time's on your side, I suppose, if they're that young, just by the very nature of that setup.
I think I just wanted to go back to what you were both talking about in terms of bullying and it being different to difficulties with peer relationships. As a parent, are there any particular signs of either that I should be looking out for to kind of distinguish between the two, to know what I'm dealing with? Is there anything that you could recommend that you keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I think so. There's clearly some of the situations that our children might face, which are not bullying, can still cause upset and a lot of issues. But where bullying's different is because it's persistent. So when I was at school, I used to lead many assemblies around bullying and helping the children to recognise when it was and when it wasn't. So when someone's just being a bit unkind, that's different to when someone's actually bullying. So we used to use the acronym STOP, STOP, and talk about it's bullying if it's several times on purpose. And that's a good thing to just sort of bear in mind, is if there's a repeated pattern, if it's targeted potentially, and there seems to be a deliberate element of trying to upset somebody, then that's where I would say it strays into bullying. And the signs, as I say, the signs can be similar, because if a child's experiencing social interaction difficulties, they might become isolated and frustrated and angry and so on. But they'll also do that if they're experiencing bullying. So I think it's just to keep an eye on how long it's been going on for. Perhaps find out from school, have there been some isolated one-off incidents, or is there a sort of pattern? Or has your child started to change their behaviours in a negative way? If they start becoming more withdrawn, more angry, and they might not necessarily say anything to you. It's quite difficult sometimes. Hopefully they will, but sometimes they find it hard to say. They might not even recognise it. Quite honestly, that some of them might not actually yet understand that what they're experiencing is not appropriate. So that can be difficult as well. So it's just keeping an eye. I think it's noticing patterns, I suppose. And if you've got a suspicion, then straight go straight to school and start asking. You might not necessarily go guns blazing saying you're convinced it's bullying, because if you're not sure, you're not. But you want them to start looking potentially for keep an eye out for them at lunchtime. What are they doing at playtime? Particularly just some really careful, focused observations in school to see where they're going, what they're doing, and who's with them, and start to unpick what's happening there. So
I
that's
think
definitely a good
that
start.
acronym, several times on purpose, is a really useful one as parents as well, because watching
Mm,
our children have difficulty with friendships is really emotive, I think. And there are many adults who'll be able to look back on their time in school and recognise a time where they went through some difficulties with their peers, and it can still make us feel quite emotional
mm,
now. We might be able to recognise how it's informed our later relationships and how, things that we're anxious about. And we have a really strong desire to want to protect our children, obviously, and that's a wonderful thing. But we have to make sure that when we're dealing with friendships, relationships, peer relationships, and bullying, that we kind of remain in the present and quite clear minded about it, and we don't kind of get clouded by perhaps some of those emotions, because they're not going to be helpful to us in terms of resolving them. So yeah, when you're trying to find that line, is it bullying or is it not? Several times on purpose is kind of that good guideline to help you decide whether it's something you need to escalate further up the management chain in school, or whether
yeah,
it's something that you perhaps start working with your child, with their peers, with the classroom teacher. And yeah.
absolutely.
I think you're spot on in, as a parent, you're going to have to take the emotion out of it when you're dealing with it, talking to your child or children. But it's also really important to acknowledge that as a parent, if your child is being bullied or experiencing peer difficulties, it's really going to hurt, isn't it?
Of
Because
course it
that's your
is.
Yeah.
child.
Of course
And
it is.
Yeah.
so you need to kind of accept and acknowledge that you feel those things and seek people to talk to you about
Yeah,
that. But it is then that healthy modelling to our children, isn't it?
Yeah.
completely.
Such a difficult topic, this one today.
I know. I think bullying as itself is enormous, so it may be that we need to do a whole podcast just devoted to that issue. Perhaps if people contact the email address, we might get a sense of how many people want us to do that. But I know it's a
That'd be
big
nice.
issue.
So I'm not an education expert at all, but I had a little look about supporting children with peer difficulties, and I kept seeing something called PSHE popping up. What is that?
PSHE, personal, social, and health education. So in a secondary school, it's taught as a separate lesson to the other lessons, normally in form groups, but it can be with groups of normally mixed ability. You wouldn't stream this in a secondary school. And it is what it says on the tin, personal, social, and health education. So as part of that, I would expect to see something around recognizing what a good friend is, how you can be a good friend, who is a good friend to you, but also emotional literacy. So recognizing your own emotions and emotions with others so that it can help you form better relationships. So I don't know how it looks in primary school though, Jason.
Very similar to that, actually. Although I think in the younger years, say foundation stage, key stage one, it kind of gets mixed into the other lessons. You don't necessarily do such standalone, but sometimes they do. Sometimes they will. But certainly as you get to key stage two, it's more likely you'll see standalone PHSE lessons. There should be a curriculum. There's part of the school's curriculum which you should be able to see on their website. That PHSE should be there, and it's probably worth looking at and seeing what are they trying to promote and how does it fit with the school's ethos and what are the values that they're trying to instill in the children. So that's definitely worth knowing, seeing how much priority they place on it. But it should sort of weave through everything they do, because clearly there's going to be opportunities throughout the day. As every things that happen just naturally will lead to discussions, won't they? So you can have an issue where there's been lots of falling out, say over lunchtime, and suddenly as a teacher you might stop and say, "Well, I was going to teach this bit of history, but I think we've got so much going on. Let's just actually do a session all about how we play this game and sort of modelling some of those appropriate behaviours in it." So it comes down to it happens just purely as an incident, as a response to things. So
I'm
um,
smiling away at that, Jason, because I know that as a form tutor, I had lots of opportunity to do ad hoc kind of
yeah,
PSHE sessions. But as a maths teacher, we were forever being asked how we could weave PSHE into our lessons? And I was like, I don't know. I'm doing quadratic equations. It's not an obvious mix. I just can't see how to do it. So I think some lessons do lend themselves more to kind of, that kind of group element, that fostering relationships between the group.
Of course they do.
But also, it's just worth bearing in mind that, the curriculum is kind of set at a government level. And I think if we're talking to the school about PSHE and using that to support our children in forming their relationships and developing the skills that they need to make and maintain friendships, we have to also be happy to say to the school, some children are functioning at lower than their chronological age. So I know that you might have covered this last year or the year before, but this is still a problem for my child or the friendship group that my child is in, and therefore a refresher might be needed about
Yeah.
how to recognize a good friend or how to be a good friend or empathy or something. So the curriculum is there, but we might need to be saying quite loudly that they need to revisit things from earlier years.
Yeah. Well, interesting enough as well, partly driven by Ofsted, dare we say that word, but the idea of curriculums in schools has moved quite a lot over the last few years. Yes, there is a national curriculum, and if you're an academy, you don't necessarily have to follow the national curriculum, which is interesting in itself. We should still get tested on the national curriculum.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is aside. Schools are still expected now to have a much more of a tailor-made curriculum. So yes, they use the national curriculum as their core, sort of core entitlement, but they have to sort of put together a much more tailor-made curriculum which meets the needs of their children in their communities, and that's actually quite important. That's critical. It's really, and actually, to be fair, that's a good thing, because that's what in schools are more inspected on, more than just outcomes now in terms of scores and tests. So that's all about how they build knowledge and skills over time, and so that things are not missed out and things are not done too often, for example. So as part of the PHEC should really reflect their school and their particular community and their needs. So it would be interesting to see how they interpret that. But I'd say in a primary setting, you'd start off really thinking about themselves, because obviously children are very egotistical when they're very young, and many of our children may still be at that stage even if they're older. But looking at your qualities as yourself, what are the things that make you special, and what are you good at, and what's someone else good at that might be different to you, and that's okay as well. And beginning to develop that understanding of difference as well, and celebrating differences and recognizing interests and so on. So then it builds, it builds into friendships and all sorts of emotionals, and begin to recognize emotions and use the right kind of vocabulary relating to them. Obviously, there's all the health things as well about hygiene and so on, cleaning your teeth and all that sort of stuff, but that's probably not relevant to this podcast. But all those sort of things, they sort of do build in hopefully stage and age appropriate ways. But I think you're absolutely right, Lisa, in saying that if you think your child's needing some more of something that might be maybe typically aimed at younger stages, there's no reason why you can't ask for that. Obviously, it's not possible maybe for the teacher to do a whole class lesson on something that the rest of the class doesn't need, but if your child needs something, then there probably needs to be some way in which they can access that kind of support. And if there are, for example, a support staff that can help, then that's always useful. There are, and schools should have someone called an ELSA as well. And I think that's probably the case in secondary as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Funny you should mention that. I was on the ELSA support website earlier, which I think we're going to link with this podcast. But they just have a wealth of primary and secondary resources that are all about friendships. So if it is something that you feel that your child is struggling with, if you feel their peer group is struggling with, their friendship circle is struggling with, then it might be possible that the ELSA support assistant can look at some of those resources and do a session for the children that are involved. So even if it's not at a whole class level, it could just be for a group of friends that are currently struggling at the moment.
And that's true. I mean, I suppose most parents have probably heard of ELSA, but it's Emotional Literacy Support Assistant. It's another acronym. Full of them,
Another one.
in schools. Schools are full of them. So yeah, they can be quite important people to support children, like say groups or one-to-one support. I think the tricky thing, isn't it, is helping our children to not feel that there's something wrong with them that needs fixing. I'm using air quotes here, but you can't see them, But this is also almost in the sense what we've got to be careful. There's a message we don't give children that says, well, you need to go and see the ELSA because you've got something wrong with your emotional development. I mean, obviously, never use that language, but that kind of the implicit message that we give. So it's got to be very carefully done. Of course, staff know how to do these things and manage it, because that's the nature of an ELSA. That's how they do things, and obviously very well trained. and they do make it fun. And usually the children love to go because they like to get a bit of one-to-one attention. Of course, why not? And so often they're doing those sort of regressive kind of play activities that help them, if it is, for example, recognizing emotions and learning to turn take and so on. So usually they do enjoy it.
I think we've started to touch on it really, but I guess I wanted to ask, what can we as parents be asking or expecting schools to do if our child is struggling with peer relationships?
Oh, we've said loads of times in loads of podcasts about communication, haven't we? And again, it's the same. We've got to, I think, on the very basics, you've got to have a good communication going between home and school. I think there. So it might be that you can manage it between yourselves, the class teacher, you, and maybe a member of staff, another support member of staff involved. You might be able to come up with strategies that support through constant communication, whether it's chat books or messages that go home, like Class Dojo and all the other platforms that can be there, just to help everyone keep an eye on things, that you can work together and at least be working on the same page and using the same kind of scripts and forms of language and so on when supporting the children with these things. If it needs a bit more than that, then it's where you might be asking for support around using an ELSA. Maybe get involving with other agencies and support, because obviously a lot of our children would have had occupational therapists, possibly a paediatrician involvement, and all sorts of other people who may have advice and particular strategies that they think the children need. So that's where you might need to have a meeting with somebody in the school, maybe the Senko, to start looking at a program of intervention to support your child. And that's why I said the ELSA can be quite important. There are kind of a few strategies that sound quite nice, but they're more than just nice. So, for example, I remember using this, and it's still used quite widely. Something called Circle of Friends. And if you hear that, it sounds like you're almost sort of grabbing a few random children, sitting in a circle, having a little chat. But it's actually more than that. It's a really structured program, and it's designed to support children who might be having all kinds of issues with social skills and peer interaction, so they can manage it in a more healthy way. So it's where that a trained member of staff will work with a group of children, but particularly where, let's say, your child is the one who may be needing the support most. A lot of the children will be ones who have pretty good social skills, but understand that they want to help. And so the trained member of staff will then lead these sessions over a period of time in a very structured way. And it does, the evidence shows that it is effective. I suppose there, having said that, you need to be realistic in your expectations, don't you? Because saying that a child's going to have an intervention like social parenting, yes, yippee, and it is great, but it doesn't mean after that, I don't know, 10, 12 weeks, however long they do it, they're going to suddenly pop out the other side fully formed and ready, because, well, no child will be at that age. But at least if they can make a little bit of progress in one or two areas, then that's great, because it's going to be that generally speaking, they're going to find aspects of their lives a little bit easier to manage. And so that's all we're looking for, is small steps in progress, because these things are slow. I had a look as well about other strategies, and one I'd never seen before, but was interested to read about, was called peer support, and I suspect it might be more than a secondary model. I don't know if it's something that Lisa would have seen either. But if anyone's interested, you can find it on the Anna Freud website, and I suppose we can put a link into that, which is a mental health charity. But this scheme was funded by the DFE originally to see how effective it would be. But again, it's about peer support. Now, I think the underpinning principle here is that children, particularly as they get older, are more likely to talk to their friends and trust friends than adults. And so, how can you capitalize on that in a way that means you can set up, again, a structured program where peers can support the child, let's say the one person who particularly needs it, so that they can use that ability to talk to their friends through different, like peer coaching, peer teaching, peer listening, mentoring, mediation, all sorts of things. It sounds like you put a lot of burden onto some of the children and young people, but it's quite not as onerous as it might sound. But they are supported in a structured way, planned again, and the people that lead those sessions are fully trained. So I thought I was quite intrigued by that. I've not seen it done personally, so I don't know what it's like, but it seems to me to have a lot of potential.
Yeah. Um, I have seen them done, but never kind of formally, never kind of like properly organised. And I think just kind of like thinking about Lee's question, what can the school do to help? I think you probably need to have it clear in your mind when you go to the school about what you want them to help with. Do you want them to help with um help your child to develop the social skills that they need or the things that they're struggling with, in which case the PSHE curriculum is a good place to look at. The ELSA support is good. Um, Doing things like the Circle of Friends intervention is good. Uh, but you might be going to the school saying, right, can you offer opportunities to support and promote friendships for my child? So in that case, you might be saying to them, okay, what clubs do you have that are in line with my child's interests so that they can meet other like minded young people? Is it possible that a member of staff can go and take them to that club the first few times so they don't have to walk in there on their own? Is it
Mm.
possible that um, you have a safe space for them to go at break and lunchtime so that their play can be supervised and so that adults can facilitate that relationship building in the early stages? And so what we're asking the school to do there is slightly different because it's not necessarily about building skills. It's kind of about promoting a friendship and allowing those connections to take place and kind of monitoring them in their early stages. I think that what you were talking about there, Jason, that kind of like that peer mentoring scheme could fall into either the first or the second, depending on whether the peer mentors or the peer befrienders or whatever phrase you want to use for them, whether they've kind of been trained at a age appropriate level or whether you're just asking them to spend time with one another. And so both are useful. I think both are absolutely useful, but if it's a more informal arrangement, that might just be a kind of like providing an opportunity to make a connection. If you want it to help develop your child's skills in any way, shape, or form, then what you might be doing is going to the school and saying, right, okay, is there a possibility that we can use some of the pupil premium plus money to set a scheme up to get the young people involved, um, trained to support one another? And so, yeah, I just think you need to be clear. Are you wanting opportunities to promote friendship and to make connections, or are you wanting a kind of like more skills development approach from the school? Um, I know that in some instances, when you go to a school to talk about friendship groups, it really is appropriate to say, can you split my child up from so and so? They're not getting on well together. There's lots of arguments at the moment. There needs to be some distance between them. Can we move classes, move the seating around? That is completely appropriate in some instances. But
Yeah,
I also think it's really useful to have conversations with school around this is what my child is struggling with. They're struggling to recognize social cues, or they're struggling with conflict resolution, or they're struggling because they tend to overwhelm new friends. Because if we're not passing on what it is that our children are finding hard, then all we're doing is kind of alleviating the immediate problem by separating them from someone, but we're not kind of putting any steps in place about how we can stop it happening again or how we can support them through like another friendship. So yes, by all means go to the school and ask for children to be kind of like distanced from one another within lesson time, but just be aware they're actually communicating our children's needs as well, not just like the current problem. I hope that makes sense.
it brings us back to what we said earlier about not putting a spotlight on the child, saying you've got something that needs fixing in a sense. So yeah, there's lots of things that you said that can be very natural and just enabling really opportunities that can give those children that chance. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely spot on. I was just thinking back to some of the things you said. Yeah, we did used to run some lunchtime clubs for children that we knew that struggled, and so that was a safe
Mm,
space they could go to avoid that huge hour of this unstructured time that they just couldn't manage. And it made that you could have somebody there who could help them, support them, play, interact in sensible ways, and they did enjoy that a lot. Um, and actually, we used to find sometimes, again, this is something you could ask your school if you felt it's appropriate. If if your child is a little bit older, it doesn't mean they're. I don't mean year 5, 6, but even if they're year 2 and year 3, they might want to be given some responsibility, like helping. Again, I got my air quotes, helping younger children. So
yeah.
often, if they need still to go back to some of those exploratory play activities that they maybe missed, and they need to do more of that in that sort of foundation stage type, but not seen to be going in there because you're too old for this. But you can sort of tailor it in a way where they can go in as a helper at lunch times. So they can take a friend with them. They can play in the sand and do those things that they might want to do. do a bit of turn taking, but whilst helping little younger children, it can be incredibly nurturing. It really brings out quite a side to them. I was amazed to watch what they could do, how they could support these little ones, and it just sort of really helped them as they were the main beneficiaries actually, although they think they're doing a lot of the helping. So it was a lovely thing to see. And again, as long as they get a chance to still mix with their peers, but they have a friend with them, they get to choose. They've got a bit of control. The little children love having an older one to help them. They usually get taken by the hand around them to go and start help the climbing frame and stuff, and then it can really help them.
I've seen some really nice instances of year 11s who perhaps have found it difficult to make friends with their peers because they're emotionally younger.
Yeah,
The work that they've done to support the year 7s in their transition into secondary school was really, really lovely to see. And that, that there was a lot of value for both parties. So when we talk about peer mentoring or peer befriending, it's not always the mentee or the one who's being befriended that
mm,
actually gets the benefits from it. The person doing it can get the benefits as well. So in the case I was talking about, these year 11s had an opportunity to legitimately, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but legitimately be with students who are probably more in line with their emotional age and make some connections and be helpful and find self value and self worth. And it brought a lot of to their confidence.
yeah,
That they enjoyed it, they got a lot out of it. So yeah, the relationships that are formed across year groups can be really helpful for both parties.
yeah, completely. I completely agree. It's great. Lovely thing to see. So again, that could be something if your school hasn't suggested it, you could advocate. And I think going back to what we said right at the start, think about what is the unmet need that's the heart of the issue here, because that's the thing that the school might not be quite so switched on to as you are, because if you've had all the training, if the school does not have as much training on being trauma informed, then they might not be aware of the sort of particular things that your child is missing and needs some such support and why they're behaving that way. So it's where we said before about you get tangled up in the issues and things that have happened. This has happened today, and this has happened. And whilst there are different episodes, they might underneath it, it's the same issue that's causing it. So that's the root cause, and that's where you need to, like you said, Lisa, go to the school and say, "What is it I want to help with here?" I think you need to let the school know that remember they struggle with this. They can't quite manage to do that. Like I said, they can be a bit controlling because they feel need because they feel safe. So let's see, So it's trying to work out strategies around that to help them manage those needs.
As parents, is there anything at home that we can do if our children are experiencing peer difficulties? Do
I
you think?
I think there is, and it's probably all kinds of things that people are already doing. But as I said right at the start, a lot of social skills and the things
Mm,
that our children struggle with are learnt, and they're learnt in the early years, and they develop and get more complex as we get older. So it might just be that we need to explicitly teach them some things through daily life. And of course, we're going to have to do it more than once. We're going to have to do it over and over and over and over again. So we might recognize that our child struggles to make compromises. And you probably compromise a million times a day, but you might not explicitly say that you're making a compromise. And so if we can start to get that word into conversation and say, well, we are going to the forest today and you want to wear your princess dress and I want you to wear your jeans. How let's make a compromise. You can wear your princess dress, but you must wear your wellies. And you're kind of really making it very clear about compromise. We're going to make a compromise. We're going to have this for tea tonight and that for tea tomorrow. And kind of just get it out there into kind of everyday language. Same can be true with conflict resolution. So I heard a wonderful thing where they were
mm,
talking about the fact that sometimes adults argue, have a disagreement, maybe they don't get on, and they might make up after the children have gone to bed. Well, the children never get to see that conflict resolution bit. They never get to see how they move from kind of like how they repair the relationship. And so the person I was listening to was saying that they stage a reconciliation the next morning so that the
mhm,
children can see how you move past not getting on back to being friends again. So it could be that we teach compromise and conflict resolution through just our day to day lives. We could also take daily opportunities to remind them not to be a space invader, if that's something that our children struggle with, to give people their personal space, to not use too much physical force. Turn taking in conversations might be demonstrated and modelled around the dinner table. along with sharing items, which, like I
Mm.
say, lots of these things are things that I know people already do. But perhaps we could think about giving them some conversation starters, some things that they could talk to their peers about, some things, how do you start a conversation with people? How do you hold a conversation? Could you ask what they did over the weekend? Could you ask what they think about their favorite, what's your favorite film or something along those lines? Um,
Mm.
and another thing that we can do just on a day-to-day basis, trying to think a little bit more about emotional literacy, is using characters on television or in books to kind of explore what other people are thinking, what their body language is telling us, and how your child might react in the same situation. So if we're asking our children questions about how they might respond to certain things, we can kind of get an idea of like where their emotional literacy is at, and kind of give them our view and let them see that there's different perspectives. Um, if you wanted to be a little bit more resource based, so rather than using kind of like daily occurrences to kind of talk
Yeah.
about the different skills, then there are lots of worksheets and the like that you could use. So one activity that I came across recently is something called a friendship wanted ad. So you can sit down with your child and think about, if what qualities do you want in a best friend, and list all the qualities that you want in a best friend and draw a nice little picture. And that's getting them to kind of really think about what friendship is. And you might want to do that activity because they pick bad friends, they pick people who aren't very nice to them, they pick people who ask them to do things they're not comfortable with. So you're talking about what good friends should look like. Or you might recognize in your child that perhaps some of those qualities aren't ones that they have. So we're kind of highlighting the fact that, to be a good friend, these are the things that we want to be.
Mm.
Um, there's a worksheet, which again, I think we're going to link to this, called Friendship Spotlight. And that gives a list, I think it's 15 scenarios. They're just very short scenarios. And you can ask your child whether you think these are red flags in a friendship, whether they're green flags in a friendship, or whether they're a bit of a warning light somewhere in between. So the scenarios are just things like, I'm scared of my friend's temper. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Maybe it's my friend doesn't let me talk to other people. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? So that's the friendship spotlight. And there's also board games. There's one called Social Skills by Finland O'Regan, and that is a board game that is all about friendship qualities. So you can take daily opportunities to like model certain skills that perhaps you feel they're lacking, or you can look to that kind of like more resource based approach and kind of like find some worksheets, some games, or some activities that will perhaps help in some way. So those are a couple of things that we can do at home to help.
Some great ideas there. I like them. Just thinking about, as you said before, about script and how to give them advice. Sometimes I found I have had to do that a couple of times as well. Just they didn't know how to initiate a game or get them to play with them, and literally say, well, you just say, would
Mm,
you like to play with me? And they say, well, yeah, or can I? I don't know.
yeah.
I don't
Can
know
I
what to
join
do.
in, please?
Just ask if you can join. Say and literally say to them the words, and then they obviously just sometimes they just need it. They don't know it, they need it. And it's great. Be very proud when they do it. Oh, well done! I just saw you ask them, and look what happened. They let you join in. Wasn't that brilliant? And even if they had a fallout and didn't last for long, doesn't matter because the thing you're focusing on is the thing that went well. So yeah, don't get hijacked by the thing that went wrong. That's the best thing to say with those situations. Because that's the next step, isn't it? You can't solve. Let's just do one thing at a time. Um,
Yeah.
and actually, something you said to me as you were talking, I just had a flashback to a time when one of the boys said to me, he was in having a right state. He's in falling out with his brother. They weren't playing. He wasn't because he was very much of the controlling behaviour type. Brother didn't want to do what he was doing it, and it was just becoming a real argument and a fight. So I had to intervene to stop it becoming a physical fight. And he just burst out in a moment of honesty. I just don't know how to play.
Oh.
I went, oh, I'm so well. Listen, I know, I understand, I can see. So let me show you. No, I thought, oh wow, that just came out in a because obviously it wouldn't often say that. I don't know how
Yeah.
to play, but that's so revealing, isn't it? And I don't think kids will often say that. But I thought, oh, okay, right. Well, we've got to
It is.
work
And
on that
going
then.
back to that idea of scripts as well, you can give kind of general ones and talk about how they might initiate conversations or ask to join in, or something on those lines. But actually, if you know that maybe like I hate to use the word play date 'cause it's normally used for like much younger children, but a meeting of friends. If
Mm,
you know that that's coming up, then perhaps you can talk about it beforehand with your child and perhaps think about some of the things that they might find difficult. So, if, for example, your child is quite controlling, well, how do you think, what if Sarah wants to watch a different film? How's that going to make you feel? What can we say to Sarah if she wants to watch this instead of that? And perhaps playing out some of those scenarios
mhm.
beforehand at least then gives them a fighting chance of knowing what they might say if it was going to happen. So that practice before an event is can be useful. Yeah.
And when you hear your child using a script that you've practiced, it's just like you've got to capture that moment and really celebrate it, haven't you?
Yeah, really.
Thinking that,
Yeah.
again, I think about one of our children who did that, and it was because he was letting other people being mean to him and unkind, and almost like he probably felt in his working model, I deserve it. We were trying to say, but you didn't like that, did you? So what you need to say is, and it was very simple as, stop, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Something really basic. And then first few times didn't say it, but you just remember to say stop. Just say it to me, all right? And then when you first catch them doing it, yes, and what happened? Yes, they stopped. Well done. And it
That's
starts,
brilliant.
and it's just those little steps that you have to sort of hold on to, and the power of a script can be really useful, can't it? Yeah, play dates. I think back to that is always start small with those. If your child struggles, if you have one friend round for a short play and often in a neutral space, it can be helpful because if it's in their space, then they're going. If they are going to be controlling, they're going to be saying, "You can't play with this. And this is for me. I can." Then it's going to make the friend not want to come back, and they won't understand that necessarily. Um, so I used to sometimes do little play visits at the park after school, which you could do for 10, 15 minutes, and then we've all got to go make your excuses because they did go and get dinner
Yeah.
time, and they could just dissipate. And then, at least the experience was positive then, didn't descend into something that was more conflict based. So they begin to build that trust between them, and then a play date was a bit easier to do.
I think for
Um,
older children, it's sometimes a bit difficult to make it shorter because they are generally used to perhaps having longer times with their peers. But I think what you can kind of do to combat that is make it quite a structured thing. So, obviously, depending upon the age and the interest of your child, it might be going to the cinema to watch a film or
mm,
coming over to watch a film because then they can spend a couple of hours together, but it's not a couple of hours of unstructured playtime. There is a real
yeah,
focus there. It might be, if your child likes cooking or baking, you might be having someone over to cook tea and eat tea. And then again, you are quite structured in what you're doing. I've got bowling as like something that I used to like doing, but I think we have to be really careful if our child is struggling of putting winning and losing games
yeah.
in. I think there need to be activities that are structured, but kind of focus more on having fun rather than that winning and losing element, because that can sometimes be a bit of a trigger for fallings out, can't it?
Mm,
So, but there are plenty of video games where they have to cooperate and work as a team as well, rather than being direct opposition to one another. So, if your child likes gaming, then actually having someone around to play games for a period of time is quite structured. But like I say, a focus on cooperation would be useful. So,
I think the only final thing I was going to say about that really was birthdays. That can be difficult, can't it? When it's birthday party time, and it's their birthday coming up, they might want to invite all the children in the class, and you might know that maybe one won't come, and you just sort of fear that, dread that moment when there's all this stuff out and there's nobody there. Of course, the shame could be so massive. So that's difficult because your child might be set. So sometimes it's good to get there early and say, "I know your birthday's coming up," and things get booked. Would you like this or this before they've had a chance to. Hopefully, both choices are kind of manageable, so that you've got perhaps a small group coming, and it's a nice activity where they'll get on. It won't be like mad rushing around a big hall with disco lights and loads of noise and overstimulation and craziness. If that's not going to work. Um, it's difficult. I don't know. That's a really hard one.
it is hard, and I think for older children, it's equally as hard. I mean, you step away from having the whole class parties in secondary school, so that's less of a pressure. But if your child doesn't have those one or two friends that they can really rely on to come and do something with, it,
Mm,
it can be a really difficult time to hold them and to manage them. And what I would say is, it can be hard for them and it can be hard for you as well to not be able to organise something for their birthday that's going to involve friends because they are struggling with their friendship groups. But in that case, perhaps don't force the issue. That there wouldn't be a lot to be gained for anyone by trying to coerce a couple of children to come along to have an
Mm.
uncomfortable and unsuccessful play date, and instead, perhaps, as Jason said, kind of get out in front of it earlier on and say, oh, well, I was thinking for your birthday, as a family, we could do this and we could do that, and try and almost preempt the fact that there won't be a friendship party or a friendship event, and kind of go above and beyond on the family one. I personally think that coercing and making children have an unpleasant birthday experience because it's something they want but something that can't be achieved is
Yeah.
perhaps not helpful. But I do know it is a very difficult time.
Is there anything else that either of you think parents should try and remember, hold in mind?
Just maybe doing a great job. I think that's one thing to say. I think because amongst all this, it's going to be hard, and you just think, oh my god, why can't I make it better? I want to fix it.
I think that's it. Ultimately, it can be really painful watching our children struggle with their feelings of rejection and struggling with their peers. But we have to remember that we want them in time to be able to make and maintain friendships independently in their adult life. And it might take them a while to get there, and there might be many friendships that are lost along the way. But that is our goal, for them to make and maintain them independently as an adult. Um, and in order to do that, we need to give them the time and give them the space to develop these skills. So we do need to be supporting them. But what we don't want to be doing is becoming overly anxious ourselves. So we pass that anxiety on to them. We don't want to become overly
Mm.
controlling of the situations and hovering all the time. I mean, first of all, try and imagine how mortifying it would be for you when you were their age if you had parent or parents just hovering all of the time and trying to micromanage every social interaction. It'd be awful. Um, so we don't really want to be doing that. We want to be giving them space. So yes, we can practice scripts. Yes, we can be aware of what's happening and kind of keeping our distance, but keep an eye on things. We don't just want to be controlling and micromanaging every bit. We need to give them the space to kind of get it wrong a few times, as hard as it is, so that in time they can learn to get it right.
Yeah, you have to be their safety net, catch them when they fall, don't you? Wrap them up with
Yeah.
love and help them on the way.
Jason and Lisa, thank you so much for today. It's a really difficult and emotive topic, and we hope that you listeners at home are okay and that you found it useful. Be sure to check out our podcast for other topics such as behaviour management, exams, and social media. Don't forget you can contact us anytime at education@adoption-focus.org.uk. Thank you for listening.